you add all those paper cuts up, and a lot of what people are doing in these companies they're just paper cutting themselves to death, right? And it's like, you go look at an analyst screen, they've got 47 Excel spreadsheets open, right? And they're moving things around, they're calling people and they're trying to do things. And so if you take that, if they've got 100 steps they're doing per day and you're able to automate 10 of them, right? I mean, that opens up like this massive time, this area for them to start thinking more strategically about where they need to go.
Welcome into another episode of Everything is Logistics, a podcast for the thinkers in freight. I am your host, Blythe Milligan, and we are proudly presented by SPI Logistics. And we've got another fantastic episode for y'all today because we are talking to Jason Murray, CEO and co-founder of Shipium and a 19-year Amazon veteran. We're going to be breaking down the delivery promises that convert, smarter multi-carrier playbooks, and where AI actually moves the needle. So, Jason, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me here. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Now, I was listening to a bunch of different podcasts that you were on. Friend of the show, Harshita, with the Ecom Logistics podcast. She's a fantastic episode that you did with her. It was really great at providing some background, as well as your website, website is really well done. We're going to bring that up a little bit later with some of the content that's available on there. But I'm curious as to, with your 19-year Amazon history, is that level of, I guess, the today chaos that we find ourselves in, or managed chaos of e-commerce logistics, did that exist back then, or is it just kind of on steroids now?
I think it's a good question. I think the story with my time at Amazon is probably more the arc and how everything just kind of continues to head in the same direction. And it's like every incremental step. And then there's obviously like these periods of time where it accelerates, right? But I think the notion or the high level meta narrative is just that everything kind of has gotten more complicated, right? So there's just, you go back in time to 1990s, and you think about like what was supply chain and what was retail, and it was like, okay, so the pinnacle was probably like a super Walmart, right, which is 200,000 or 300,000 SKUs. It's all kind of managed through distribution, et cetera. And now you think about like, just as Amazon followed this arc, my career followed this arc, it's just more SKUs, more channels, more carriers, more kind of ways that people are discovering things, more expectations that are different and variable. And it's like all of those variables push everything. And then you end up on the back end with just like, they multiply against each other. So complexity just gets worse and worse and worse. And so, I think the thing that's interesting now is like, you hear people like kind of wanting this old time where everything was stable, and they reminisce about like these, we just have these containers come in and then we sell them in the store and how easy that was. And it's just like, that isn't the reality. And so you've got now all of this complexity that people have to kind of digest, and it's combined with like exogenous events and like accelerating technology. You take the last 3 or 4 years and you've got a combination of the pandemic followed by kind of this onslaught of AI, followed by kind of like geopolitical stuff that's causing things to happen. And I just think that's the new norm. I don't see it going away. I can't predict what the next thing's going to be, but there's going to be a next thing.
And that is really a catalyst of your not only career trajectory, but when you started Shipium, I believe it was 2019. And then, I mean, everybody knows what happened in 2020 and then the years that followed. And so it really feels like did you hit the market at like the perfect time with launching Shipium, that, there were all of these issues, these greater issues that people needed to solve for that level of complexity. And now, you have a solution for that complexity. How did you plan for something like that?
I can't say that it feels like I hit the market at the perfect time, often on the day-to-day life. But I think the need, we're obviously like any other business, we're skating to, what the customer wants, right? Like we're moving towards that. And I think the whole point of like, why did we build this technology stack in Amazon solve these problems, right? Why do we do it? And it was really like, okay, you can use data science, machine learning, coordination, all of this stuff to basically solve these flexibility problems. And I think the need for that just continues to grow, and we're feeding off of that as a company. And so I think in a lot of ways it was good in the sense that things had kind of reached this point that the demand is a lot clearer. Like if you go back 10 years, it would be much harder to sell what we're trying to sell to retailers or manufacturers or whoever else, because the pain was not as acute in that sense. So I think then you kind of go back 3 or 4 years, and when we really started kind of going to market, and a lot of these factors had kind of driven home the need for technology as a way to solve these problems, which I think we discovered at Amazon a little bit earlier because of the scale that Amazon was running and kind of how far ahead they were in more of these diversified, complex supply chains that Amazon's kind of known for. So
Yeah.
the answer is yes, and I just said it in like 1,000 words, but
Which is perfect for a podcast interview.
exactly.
You got to be able to shoot them up, and you knock it down. So
Exactly.
And so I'm curious around the sort of light bulb moment that you work so long at Amazon. What was that moment like to think of, okay, I want to do this, but I want to do this on my own, and I want to start a company and solve these problems? What did that moment and that journey look like?
Well, some of it is kind of personal, right? Like I'd love to say that the narrative was like I woke up in the middle of the night and had this idea, and that maybe plays well in some sense. But I mean, the thing was about my personal career was just that when I got out of school in the 90s, I wanted to be at a startup, and I went to a startup, and then soon after went to Amazon because I was like really liked what they were doing. I really liked the idea. I used Amazon. I was an early adopter of Amazon, and I was buying like technical books, and it was the only place I could get them. And the concept of it coming to my door was just such a magical experience for me. And so I had this like personal connection to it, and that's why I ultimately went there. But at the time I started there, it was a startup, right? I mean, it was not. It had obviously like the time frames in that period of time or in that era were much shorter, so they'd already IPO'd and stuff like that. But it like effectively it was a total mess there when I got there in '99. It was like total chaos, and you had a lot of room to grow. There was invention was happening all over the place. The people, like the mix of people, was just amazing. Like tons of talent, and so that whole energy system was just this kind of perfect combination. And then obviously, like over the years, you keep building, and this thing kind of grows, and you end up in this. For me personally, it was kind of like a frog boiling problem, right? Where the company's getting bigger and bigger. Your day to day is becoming more about politics. You're less hands on. You're less building. You're less connected to kind of what's happening, and that's it's what's required if you're going to move up to the VP or the executive level. You have to kind of move to that state. And so I think if I look back at my Amazon career, I got exposure the kind of 2008 to 2016 period when Amazon really started to scale. It was a fascinating and amazing journey, and I think even when we were there, we were you could kind of feel you were part of something. Like there was this notion of that happening, and so seeing that level of scale and this stuff was really a great experience. So I don't want to take anything away from that. But once you kind of get out of that, and then you kind of start looking around at like what I want to do next, and what am I, I've got only so many more of these runs before I effectively am retired or whatever. Like it's going to be harder and harder to do, right? What do I want to do with this, right? And I think for me, this was kind of what drove it. Was I wanted to get back to building, and that's kind of how I ended up in this situation. I will say that when I left Amazon, I didn't have a totally baked plan, right? Definitely, this was something that I left Amazon and then I explored the space a bit, and I kind of started with maybe I'll be a CTO or something, but ultimately kind of got to like I really want to go through this process. I want to be in a 3 or 4 person team and see what we can do, and go through this journey. And there's no guarantee that was financially the right decision, but like personally, I just love these experiences and building so much that's going to trump everything else that I'm kind of talking about. So for me, it was a very personal journey. It was more that got me here, but I'm so glad that I went through this, because I do think, it's like I finally to go from totally bottom nothing to something, right? Is the 0 to 1, the 1 to 10, the 10 to 100 process is an amazing thing to go through if you have the opportunity.
Now, did you know right away what you wanted Shipium to focus on, or was it kind of a product of iteration?
No, we definitely went through the product market fit phase. We had a theory that the original kind of hypothesis was, well, first of all, at the time, like Flexport had a lot of energy, and so the thought was, is there even like, should we be even looking? Are we looking in the right spot, right? And then we kind of eventually were like, well, let's just follow what we did at Amazon. That's the like focus on the end customer experience, but the original theory was we really go hard on delivery promise. And although that is still part of our offering, and I actually think it's starting to pick up some steam now, the reality was we went into the pandemic and people were not really concerned about conversion lift because they already were selling more than they could handle. So we kind of pivoted to more back-end optimization, which is not necessarily outside of what the roadmap looked like or the overall vision. It all fits in that narrative, but the kind of order you do things and how you approach it definitely changed, right? And also just like, what is the market? You ultimately have to come to a product that people want to buy, and you're trying to understand like where are the acute pain points that you can focus on, right? And I think we got to this back end optimization piece just was this kind of gaping hole the deeper we dug. And so getting into like transportation lane optimization at the especially kind of really focused on parcel and these diverse networks, there was just a lot of opportunity based on kind of what we were hearing from our customers, what they were dealing with, what they were struggling with, and that's kind of how the path took. And so now I think we've the kind of go to market or how we've gone through this, it ended up being way more focused on let's like solve that and then kind of build off of that as opposed to top down that we originally thought. So to your question, it's changed significantly. Like the way that we thought we were going to do just was totally different than what actually happened in reality.
Yeah, I think that's a journey that's similar for a lot of people who are building. You have to you have this hypothesis, you take it to market, and you hope the market responds positively. But you more or less you're going to have to make some iterations to it in order to build something that people want and they're going to be a repeat buyer of. And so with that all said, for folks who may not be aware, what is sort of the high level overview of what Shipium provides?
So we have a shipping, transportation, supply chain optimization platform, right? And what we've been hyper focused on is we have a kind of transportation piece, which is really focused on like, if I want to deliver to a customer by a date, how do you do that in the most efficient way possible? So we'll choose carriers, methods, etc. It's all very real time. We model out transportation lanes for all the carriers that we're working with using machine learning, etc. We have a internal cost model to kind of create a digital twin of what it's going to cost you, what hours your building runs, what are the cutoff times, et cetera. So we're modeling all of that, and that lets us make a decision. So you take that and you can roll up to like what we call fulfillment engine, which is basically this notion of where do you ship from. So this is a thing where you're looking at making a decision on where you should ship it from within your network, right? And then you take that same set of data and you build up to our delivery promise product, which is what are you telling the customer in terms of expectation.
And so for a lot of, especially with your history at Amazon, they pioneered the 2-day shipping movement. And so for a lot of folks, that's kind of the default expectation now is getting that 2-day shipping. But obviously that's unrealistic for a majority of retailers. Or is it realistic, if you optimize properly?
I think that what happens is it's about kind of specificity, and part of the problem is this is where the scenario where your technology is limited in some way, you can't provide the level of detail that you need to provide to your customer. So What to some degree we're offering is almost like given your network. There are scenarios where if it's nearby, I can cheap. If you're in Florida, if the fulfillment center is in Tennessee, I can probably get it to you in 2 days very cheaply, right? And so, are you communicating to that to your customer? Are you taking credit for that? Um, do you have the tools to kind of measure what is the revenue lift from actually making that decision versus what it's going to actually cost you incrementally, right? And are you offering that to the customer in a systematic way, right? And so all of that is like, again, just kind of back to this high level pattern that it's like you have all this data. You have customer data, you have transportation network data, you have intention, you have business goals, and trying to mash that together in some way that meets the needs of your business is really what we're doing. We're optimizing all of those factors to say, make the right decision for your business. So I like, interestingly, as we've spread out into some of these other industries, like B2B, parts distribution or B2B pharma or something like that, right? The needs are often different for different reasons, right? They might be more concerned about risk versus cost. But the approach is the same. It's like, I'm going to take huge amounts of data from all these different sources and make a systematic decision on how to actually solve that problem, as opposed to kind of, just imagine like, I'm going to put some rules in a spreadsheet and mostly hits it, but not all the time. And as a customer, you're like, hey, I'm like right next to the distribution. I can see the distribution center from my window. Why is it saying it's going to take 6 days, right? So it's just all of that. And I think that's the technology gap that we're trying to really bridge, right, with the product, right? There just is not. You can't possibly with humans solve this problem systematically.
Yeah, and I think for the end users, it's not necessarily about can you get it to me within 2 days. I think it's more when can I have an accurate delivery date
That's a
as soon
big
as
factor
possible.
too. Yeah, you have the classic, like, I got the party on Saturday. I need new dress shoes, right? Like, it's Monday, so as long as it gets there by Thursday, I'm fine. But I need to know that.
How complex is that? I mean, I'm sure it's insanely complex in order for a retailer to be able to promise that. Is it realistic for, a lot of retail outside of the Walmarts and the Amazons of the world? Is it realistic to be able to provide those estimated delivery dates, or is that all just dependent on the all of the supply chain?
No, I mean, this is all just totally doable.
Hmm.
It's not. I wouldn't say it's easy, but we understand. If you go into even a smaller retailer, let's just imagine you had two buildings, one in New Jersey and one in Reno or something, right? I mean, we're going to understand this is when you will, if an order happens now, this is when you will ship it, and this is the probability that it will arrive by a given date, right? And that's all kind of modeled in the system based on understanding of what your network's doing, our understanding of what the transportation looks like, right? It's all a prediction, obviously. So you have to kind of constantly be tracking how well did you do against your predictions? Is it within the tolerance of the process, right? I mean, Amazon itself did not. We there was never an expectation that we were going to hit 100% of the promises, right? Any physical process is going to have like statistical variation. It's just, but we can tell you very precisely, like, what is that, right? And are you willing to live with it? And are you okay with the kind of negative consequences of the spin versus not?
So it's really, I mean, it's not simple because as you're talking about,
Yeah,
bringing in all of these different data sets,
yeah, exactly.
I almost, my heart starts having, palpitations a little bit because it's like, oh, that's a lot of data. That's a lot of, room for error. And so as
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
thinking about this through, what does that process look like of just making sure that the customers that are coming in have the data to be able to make those actionable decisions?
I mean, it ends up being, again, like, so we're going to talk about AI in a little bit, but this is kind of why I'm so excited about this. I think you've got validation and inspection processes that we currently do to kind of solve this. But I think we're on the brink now of these, and they continually speed up as you automate these steps, right? Like, how do we read in a contract from someone, or how do we then verify that the costs are correct after that contract is ingested, or how do we verifier speed. Like we're kind of constantly back testing our prediction models versus what actually happened, because we also have the tracking data of the actuals, right, to model that. So all of that it has to happen. I think what's so exciting about kind of the AI movement is we should be able to speed this up, right? And if you think about what's AI really good at, it's really good at taking information and kind of distilling it down to something meaningful. And so it fits this problem just like a glove. And that's why we're so excited about this as a future thing. And whether that's more of an online process that's bringing in new information that we just previously couldn't have possibly fathomed getting access to, because it can dissect and categorize that stuff automatically, or it's just taking existing processes that took too long and making them 1,000x faster, right? Both of those things are incredibly powerful in terms of increasing the automation, increasing the flexibility, increasing the kind of ability of your business to run at the way you want it to run.
And so for, let's definitely dive into the AI side of things, because I think when we mention AI, there's a couple different reactions to it. Some people might roll their eyes, of course, but then there's the other perception of, well, I could just, ask ChatGPT and it should be able to tell me. But there's an additional layer of complexity, especially at the enterprise level, where you're dealing with all of these different data sets. And so where is, I guess, AI having the most impact in those sectors relative to Shipium?
Well, I think it's super early days, obviously, and I think if you go through like kind of the diffusion life cycle, which is common in all these like new technology things. I think when ChatGPT kind of first came out, I think it was like late 22 or early 23, something in that time period.
2022,
right?
I think.
Yeah, so you started to see. So there's obviously like everyone's like, this is totally magical. We got to do something. So all the boards call the CEOs call their CTOs, the CTOs tell their team to just put something in place. And most of it doesn't work. I think there's been several studies that have come out. It's not surprising. Like this is what it's just like, let's throw some spaghetti against the wall and see what happens. And I think from the standpoint of someone like me or someone like a COO or somebody who's evaluating the stuff, like you also have seen the like blockchain push in the 2010s, right? Where you're like, this is going to ensure that no containers ever get lost and it never went anywhere. Or metaverses are going to run the goggles, people are going to have goggles on in the fulfillment centers and productivity is going to triple, right? So, false promises from kind of envision technology versus what actually occurred. And so I think though, what happens though is you get these personally at a very, as we're going through the cycle, you start to get these proof points of how it's going to work, right? And for me, I think the thing that starts to bring it home, right, is if you look at how the software developers are using it, right? And this becomes, as these proof points start building, it becomes easier and easier to envision, like, where is this going in terms of our industry, right? And I mean, I programmed in the 90s, right? And it was this gnarly process with lots of like testing and manual this, and everything took forever. And it was you like, to some degree, we were all kind of like these artist wizards who were trying to figure all this out, right? And now I watch my developers, right? And they've got one agent building tests as they're writing code across. On the other side, there's two agents writing code, and they're competing for who has the better results, right? And the production of that is like, the only thing I compare it to is like when we switched from assembly language to C, or like a really low level computer language to actually having a language at all. And that's this kind of jump, right? So the reason I'm going in depth on this topic is because you're starting to actually see how this is going to work, right? And I so then you kind of like become more, as this matures, as the cycle matures and the use cases start kind of filling in, it becomes very clear of what's kind of happening and where this is going. And I am like 100% convinced that this is going to fundamentally change the industry. And I mean, if you kind of like play this forward and say like 2028, you imagine like a COO or a CSCO has now a team of analysts, right? Like they have a bunch of people in the structure, but there's analysts doing things and making sure that operations run, right? They're checking buildings, they're talking to GMs, they're looking for events, extraneous events. They're looking at all these things, and then they're adjusting knobs or adjusting levers or changing the way things are moving. And if you think about 2028, like the way to think back from that is we're going to have now a fleet of autonomous agents that are running and checking all of this, right? This is all of these tasks that were like relegated to humans to deal with all this craziness because they were the only ones that could process at the end of the day this weird form of information, like all these different forms of information. It's just such a perfect use case for this is eventually going to be replaced with AI because it's going to be able to do it faster, cheaper, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So, that's what I'm working back from, and now we're in the phase of actually kind of building what does this next round of kind of more AI focused tools that fit this particular narrative, right?
Yeah, because I keep telling people that it's the MIT study, quote unquote study that just came out recently, which was a very flawed study. But it's obviously it's getting headlines across social media. I don't won't go into the
It's not surprising. Like it's like I said, I think when you do this first kind of like you just this was kind of like the first phase of that the people's rollouts of the stuff, and now we're getting to like this next level. But anyway, keep going.
Well, it's a new information era, and that's what I keep trying to tell people is that we are in a new information era, and then we can take action based on where the AI is going to fit the most in certain specific sectors of our life where it's machine learning but with an additional intelligence component on top of it. And so for a lot of those folks, they probably just didn't realize how bad their data set was, and that's why they can't really make it too actionable. But I do think that there's been some error in some of the messaging, especially around agents, where they're just going to come in and solve that problem. As a podcaster, I'll be able to get an agent and they'll be able to take care of all of the post production and editing, and maybe that will happen by 2028. Hopefully, some of those things will be able to happen, but it's more using it as your calculator and using it where it makes the most sense. So I'm curious with your early deployments with AI and especially around the agent side of things, where have you seen those early winners of where it makes the most sense for retailers and enterprise shippers to use?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does end up being this like operator or multiplier. That's at least the current flavor of what's working now. And so I think you have like these micro productivity things that kind of add up to time savings in aggregate, and then you have like larger scale kind of automation type efforts that help, right? And I think to your machine learning point, we kind of think of it as that's something that it's probably not going to actually go. It's more or less building on top of it because these models that we've spent all these years building and of kind of understanding this data. It's more about now you have this set of tools on top of that can leverage them. So for example, we have a simulation product that's kind of taking advantage of our models to actually run through like here's a hypothetical scenario, and so for our kind of folks at our company to actually run the simulations, they have to set up each individually, build out the experiment. And so you can imagine this becomes effectively the AI is taking in what you're trying to accomplish, and then it's firing off lots of simulations, right? And I think if you even look at like if you ever, if you're kind of a curious person and you're using ChatGPT, for example, ask it to show its work, right? What you'll see is that it's doing stuff like, if you say like, okay, I'm going to upload an image, can you pull the text out of this image, right? What you'll see is that it's actually doing stuff like firing off Python scripts of stuff that does OCR. So it's not, it doesn't solve it down to the granular level. What it allows you to do is kind of orchestrate lots of things. But I think specific examples on the micro level, we have this inevitably, if people are shipping with us, they're asking questions all the time about like, why did this happen, right? And so some of that can be handled by reporting, but like in general, there's gnarly ones that come in, and the way that process would work traditionally is they submit a ticket, an engineer gets to it, takes a look, like tries to figure out what's going on, reports back, they go back and forth over the ticket, and then some resolution is agreed upon, right? And so we're launching, one of our first things we're launching is just like what happened to the shipment. And that's a case where this is something that someone is potentially spending time on this throughout the day, because inspection is part of any healthy business. But now they're able to just do this in a chat interface to speed up their time, right? And that naturally works into the workflow. Another example, though, might be we have a product I mentioned at the beginning. We have a product that decides where to ship from. Well, at Amazon, you had this we had this thing called little red button and big red button, where you would basically hit these buttons. If it wasn't really a button, but it was a fun name. But we basically you would push the little red button if a fulfillment center was having issues, right? And it would basically then reroute orders around that. But the assumption there is that someone is sitting there watching for what are the signals that indicate that this fulfillment center is having a problem, right? It might be the GM is telling you this, or it might be that there's weather events starting to happen. There might be like people not logging in. And so this is an example of, you have an agent that can basically be watching for these scenarios all the time, and then telling telling the planning agent, I need to then go and you need to reroute from this building because we're struggling to keep up, right? So these are something that we're kind of in the pilot exploratory phase, these larger things. So it has to be a combo of both. But I will say one more thing, just there is this problem when you go back to the dev example, you go back to the developer example I talked about a second ago, you go back to like how people are thinking about this, you even think about like the internal DNA of a company. The workflows do change, and that's where some of the resistance comes from, right? People are not wanting to change because it inherently changes the workflow, right? Like we built in software development, we had these staged workflows because this is realistically what humans could handle. Like this is how you did it. When you have this kind of AI notion and you can write tests live as this thing is going out, all of the processes you had traditionally don't work anymore. So we're starting to rebuild our entire dev process, right, to match what this is more going to look like in this AI native agenda. And I think that's going to be the scenario with supply chains also, and logistics, right? And so we're going to have to kind of fundamentally rethink how do you run the teams, what metrics you look at, like how do you think about who's doing what, how do you organize, and that's all like coming, right? It's going to be part of this transition. That I think the main thing is you have to be in this kind of experimental or trial mindset. And so if I'm giving people feedback, it's usually more about culture that needs to shift within these companies, less about like a specific thing to do, because it's going to keep changing in 3-month increments, right? Like what didn't work now is going to work in 3 months. So you've got to be in this mindset of kind of constantly absorbing and changing and moving.
Yeah, because I think you hit the nail on the head, because so many people are sort of, I'm a tech optimist, but there are so many tech pessimists, and they try AI once and it's like, oh, it sucks, it failed, it's worthless, it's overhyped, and that creates this resistance to change, that resistance to being adaptable. And there's lots of companies out there that Coinbase, I think their CEO recently just said, like, if you're not going to use AI, you won't have a job here. And I think it's more of a philosophy standpoint that you have to be able to use these tools. And it sounds like this is something that you've implemented within your company, and then now can be able to help other companies adapt those similar philosophies.
That's exactly right. You have to culturally shift, and we have internal to Shipium, and I think there's going to be folks who are kind of not on board with that, or they disagree with my assessment of where the future is going. And I think great. Like I don't have any. We're that isn't. We'll ultimately find out whether I'm wrong or overshooting or whatever. But you have to kind of have everyone marching towards the same drum as we go into this, and it does require kind of a aligned culture. So I think that totally makes sense. I mean, culture is really important in the sense of like who is going to be successful there or not there at your organization, right? It's true of any organization. And so I think we want our we want our folks to be extremely curious. We want them to be trying things. I'm implementing a process internal to my directs, for example, where I let them install a new tool every month, right? And just to actually feel what it feels like to implement this thing, because there are pains, right? And you don't, it doesn't really do anyone any good to say let's AI stuff, right? You have to kind of get to that next level. My general concern, my feeling is though, when you start trying things, you find things pretty quickly. Like it's not, maybe you will have a different experience, but the more I use AI, the more bullish I become on this. And this is kind of where my 2028 stance comes from. I don't use it and go like, it's kind of dying off. Like going back to say the blockchain example from a couple of minutes ago, right? You never got momentum off of that example because you couldn't find use cases that were fundamentally changed, right? And this one though, the more you use it, the more you will, because it bleeds into like, we're now starting to use it more and more in our sales process. So our SDRs are 10x what they could do, 10x maybe 100x what they could do 3 years ago, right? And so every aspect of the business just continues to, as you establish that usage pattern in DNA, it's very powerful.
And so as you're building out your own internal processes and reworking them, and it's probably a process of ripping things out of what used to work and putting things in, and probably doing it several times over and reiterating as you go. With the customers that you're onboarding, because I would love to get into some of what the onboarding process looks like whenever a new customer decides to do business with you. What do those early days look like, and what does maybe some of the early AI agents that they could take advantage of in their own data sets?
I think that we are a couple places we're leaning into. So I would say the onboarding process itself is going to be pretty reworked over the next 6 months. So I would say, like, traditionally what we've done is like, give us your contracts, give us your details, let's go through this. And it ends up being, let's say more like weeks, right? But we feel like this is really has the possibility of being days or hours. And if
Oh,
you
wow.
can bring information in that fast, and maybe it's like in the traditional sense, maybe it's like 80% correct or 90% correct, but it's still so that allows us to effectively bring your data in very quickly, and then even prove some points for you early, right? Which is magical, and that's like you kind of have to part of a sale. Everybody who's in this space is getting pitched by vendors who are going to save them 10x, 5x, 3x, 12x, right? Whatever the thing is, they're getting hammered by that. I mean, if you are a CSCO, you are getting blasted by vendors all the time, making all sorts of promises. And if you added them all up, your business would basically be free. But obviously that isn't true. And and I think therefore people are in a healthy sense skeptical. And so our ability to kind of bring your data into our system, that's a huge factor, right? So because then we can prove it quicker, we can move along those axes. I think then you have kind of incremental improvements to the platform, which I was talking about, the question, the Q&A thing, right? This is just like, this makes their day-to-day life. We already believe we made their life simpler by being in a console and kind of having a more modern approach to this, but you throw in the question and answer piece, that like takes you up to the next notch, right? And then I think our first kind of the thing that we feel like is probably the most interesting early is the simulation product. We're effectively creating a digital twin of your network, and where we're getting a lot of the interest is how are we able to run these simulations using a combination of humans and AI to basically do something that would have taken weeks to set up and analyze, and take that down to days now, right? And so that's really where we're leaning in on some kind of first pass type game changing stuff.
Yeah, and for folks who are just tuning in or maybe even listening, what I have open right now is a screenshot from one of your onboarding videos that's on the website. I talked earlier about how I love your website, and I love this video because we could be we're talking about complex things for a lot of folks, and it's tough to visualize it, but this graphic is perfect at visualizing it, talking about your systems, where it's the website, the OMS, the WMS, the TMS, the ERP, the planning, and then bringing it all together under the Shipium platform. And so with a lot of your stuff, with a lot of the things that you've been saying, during this conversation, it really centers back to what you call the shipping operating system. So could you kind of explain that, where Shipium comes into play, bringing in all of these different data sets?
Yeah, I mean, this is really back to kind of even, pre like AI, just back to kind of fundamental philosophies. There's kind of two things that really separated Amazon's approach to supply chain. After I got out of Amazon, I was able to kind of see how the world ran, right? And I think when we were in it, we were just kind of doing it, and we weren't really thinking about what it meant holistically, right? But if you step back from my time at Amazon, there was two big things. The first was kind of what you're alluding to here, which is what I call like this coordination effect. And so you put what typically will happen in enterprises is they will have these vertical slices, right? So the order management system is responsible for everything that's an order, and so therefore it's going to make the decision about where to ship from, right? So the magic at Amazon is we had a team. There was probably 1,000 people on that team that did order management stuff, and we had a big team that did warehouse management stuff, right? Like there was these huge teams that were focused entirely on those problem spaces. And really, what I was doing at Amazon was I lived in this middle area where we were coordinating these decisions. And I heard you say the word calculator a bit ago, and really to some degree, we're acting as this super sophisticated calculator that could make these decisions systematically. And we really stayed in our lane. I had no interest. I have like, there's a bunch of things that OMSs do that I have no interest in doing. I don't, it's a hard problem. It's complicated. There's rules, there's all this stuff going on. But what we're trying to do is be very good at, if you make a decision to ship from a given building, there's transportation implications, right? There's inventory implications. There's like cost structure implications that, unless you are factoring in all these things that we have access to horizontally, you're not going to be able to consider. You're going to make the wrong decision inherently. And sometimes you'll make the right decision, but if you're making it wrong, let's just say 10% of the time, that's on the orders of millions of dollars for even a medium-sized enterprise, right? So that's the first piece, this kind of coordination thing. And then I think the second piece that was just really magical was I took over the supply chain tech stack around 2009. And that was right about the time that kind of machine learning was starting to take hold, right? And so we had, of course, like traditional operation research scientists on our team, but the thing that we did a really good job of is getting them to play together such that we started using these modern techniques for our forecasting, for our predictions, for our modeling of transportation lanes, all the stuff that's kind of required to make these decisions. And so that is an effort where these data sets tend to span all of these different stages, right? And so you take those two things together and you kind of end up with this operating system that the way we're viewing it is again, I don't want to be in the WMS space. I don't want to be in the OMS space. What I want to be is this optimization data layer that lives kind of below all those, that helps you make really good decisions about transportation, inventory, et cetera.
And for a lot of just the industry as a whole, or just retailers as a whole, supply chain feels like there's, they have a seat at the executive table, the boardroom table now. And so in your eyes, with using Shipium, they're able to, those supply chain managers or executives can now sit down and be able to see, if I pull this lever, if I make this switch, XYZ is going to happen, and I'll be able to show up to these meetings better informed about some of the future forecastings that we're going to be making using this dashboard of all of these different levers that we could be pulling. Is that kind of the idealistic way that someone is going to sit at a computer?
And also a great AI use case, right? I mean, like bringing all this together. But it's exactly that. I mean, if you're making a decision about what you're doing in your network or how you're doing it, it has implications on customer experience. It has implications on cost, which basically just means that you have money you're potentially losing on the conversion and sales side, or gaining, right? And you have cost structure implications on the back end. And there is this kind of ideal trade-off, right? Like it really is a math problem. And I think we're trying to bring that whole like holistic thought process to bear. We want people to understand these trade-offs and make the right decision for their business.
And so it sounds like it's very reminiscent of maybe some of your early days where it's like I think you mentioned that you were kind of these like creative wizards, and it maybe sounds like that's exactly what you're doing on this side of the thing.
Yeah, now it's coming in the, well, I mean, that's the classic thing, right? You figure out the low, you just kind of keep. No, I think in those days, what I was talking about was just kind of like the mechanics of actually programming required all this, like the bottom level programming is these tools have gotten so good. They other things help too along the way, cloud and SaaS and APIs and all the other stuff that's kind of happened over the last 30 years, but that kind of gets more taken away, and so then you end up in this like dynamics of the system. What do you do with your data? How do you kind of use this new set of tools? So obviously, yeah, it's a new puzzle at a different level, but totally like, it again, like I love these puzzles. This is what I live for, like figuring out how to solve these, how to get value out of this stuff, and I love that it has this kind of like physical world feel and touch to it. So
Now, you talked about some of those early wins that are happening internally at your company, but what about, maybe some of your customers? Have they had a chance to sort of pilot some of these agents, maybe get some early wins? What does that process look like from a rollout perspective?
I think we're kind of in the getting feedback phase, and so the appetite is definitely there.
Mm.
I think there's a people are looking for, and I think when you demo the stuff, it's like very clear to them there's a win. I think a lot of it ends up being a little, we've been so as a company focused on kind of the optimization side of it, so just like what's the cost savings, right? And so now we're getting into this new territory of like, it's more about automation and productivity and flexibility, which are a little squishier. But the excitement level at these companies, when we show them like, okay, what if I was able to, here's this chatbot demo that we're starting to roll out that is going to tell you the state of the shipment. What would that do? And they're like, I mean, this is like, I can now free myself up to be focused on these strategic issues as opposed to grinding away on trying to get through these small tasks, right? And that's the stuff. That's where it's like very experimental as we figure this stuff out, but incredible. I think you add all those paper cuts up, and a lot of what people are doing in these companies they're just paper cutting themselves to death, right? And it's like you go look at an analyst screen, they've got 47 Excel spreadsheets open, right? And they're moving things around, they're calling people, and they're trying to do things. And so if you take that, if they've got 100 steps they're doing per day, and you're able to automate 10 of them, right? I mean, that opens up like this massive time, this area for them to start thinking more strategically about where they need to go, which are frankly just things that probably need to happen at the company, whether it's a renegotiation of a contract or following up on things or driving some change within a building. All that stuff needs to happen. And there isn't time for that because there's just all of these minuscule things around information flow within supply chains. So
Is there anything that's coming down the pipeline, maybe in the next, you mentioned 2028 in a reverse engineering, where you think we're going to be about in 2028, but I'm curious as to what is sort of those present day wins that Shipium provides. I read a couple different case studies, that you had on your website. I think it was peak readiness with Manhattan WMS, Saks off Fifth Avenue moved from single carrier to multi-carrier fast, and saw that faster is cheaper. Which of those, I guess, levers can be pulled today for some of your customers that or maybe even prospects that are listening to this episode?
well, I think I've been trying to kind of keep the conversation mostly focused on kind of the brand new AI stuff, but
Sure.
yeah, certainly within our ecosystem, like we're selling, we open up a whole new carrier network. We are able to unilateral, almost every scenario, save a bunch of money by method optimization. We've got customers who are now using our fulfillment engine to more precisely make decisions, where we have delivery promise installations that basically help customers say, tell their customer this is precisely when you will receive it. And so all of this is in the mix. I apologize for I maybe went too far on the other side, but this is stuff that the company has been focused on over the last 4 years as we've kind of gone to market with this and built out all this infrastructure. And so that all
that all continues to move along. I think a lot of discussion today, and we pride ourselves in the fact that they almost always have some sort of financial benefit attached to them. Like it's always about after we've installed this, we saved a big retailer on the order of $17 million, right? Like annualized right this year. And so by optimizing how they're running their methods and kind of eliminating, having a very, very precise model of what their cost structure is compared to their carriers, we're able to wring out all of this money out of their current spend. And so that's from their standpoint, it's all almost entirely automated. They don't have to do anything. This money, it's just free on the books, works, et cetera, right? So all of that is going extremely well, and is part of the continues to be what we build upon. And I kind of said, I think very early in this episode, really we think of this new AI stuff as accelerants for that. So how do you get to that stuff faster, right? Like how do you, if you want to run scenarios against our simulations, like instead of having to set it up, work with our customer success, et cetera, can you just basically interact with a chat bot that gets this thing going? And that's kind of it's back to your point of like, if I'm sitting at the table, I'm the CSCO, and I want to talk to people about what are some of these scenarios. I want to be able to turn those around fast, because you can't be at the table and say, we're thinking about implementing this customer experience piece, right? You can't be, well, okay, in 4 months, I'll be able to give you the impact of that, right? It has to be very fast. It has to be accurate, or you're going to get grilled on the back end. And so that is all of this notion of like moving faster, flexibility, autonomous, right? And that's what we're kind of building off of with this new AI stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're freeing up from an overall philosophy. So you're getting all the data in to be able to make smarter decisions and make those smarter decisions faster. But then also adding the agentic AI model on top of that to be able to get rid of the mundane. So those same folks that are sitting at the table can then be able to focus on the strategy, the money side of things.
Exactly.
Anytime you can get more profit back, that is you're doing your part as as an executive. So
yeah, and I think culturally, even the process of bringing the data in, that's going to be dramatically improved as we get better and better at this. And that's part of this kind of like cultural transformation of how we think about all these problems. Like we solved problems a certain way 3 or 4 years ago that now you just fundamentally solve them differently. It's part of the game.
Yeah, I used to tell people that I would, and I would do this, that I would hand transcribe a podcast episode. And now I don't have to think about that. And
that's incredible.
I can't tell you how many hours in the day that saves.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is really amazing how much better these things are at that. It's, there's obviously been like dictation software for years, right? But it's like the level and the quality, like, language translation and all this, super minor thing. But I remember early at Amazon, when we launched a new country, like the localization process, it took probably 6 months, right, to get through the kind of US to Germany translation, right? And it's like, when we launched our kind of our Spanish version of our console for a Mexico installation we did, it was like it just happened, right? I mean, it's just really incredible how these things just speed up certain parts of the information flow that were just so difficult.
Yeah, well said, because it's just, there's all these different aspects of whenever you're implementing new technology and making these iterations that you can't see until you try. And so it's not a try once and then, throw it in the trash can and never revisit it again. It's, no, let's think about how creatively we can solve these big problems, because big problems probably also have big costs associated with them. And every business is looking to save money at all levels. So, Jason, I know we've talked about a lot of different aspects within this episode, but I'm curious where you kind of think obviously the holiday season is approaching. Where e-commerce isn't going anywhere. Obviously, it's a mainstay here. Where do you kind of see the next, I guess, 6 to 12 months shaping up, and how can retailers and shippers be best prepared for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I love your kind of quick summary there. I mean, I think obviously we have all of our peak readiness stuff going on right now. Everybody's been the tariff thing that's kind of dominated that part of the narrative all year has been floating around in the background, and I think is mostly settled at this point. I think we saw that our customers were mostly upset about the unpredictability of it, less so than the actual kind of what it specifically was. But I think you take all that, and I think I hate to be a broken record, but I just think 2026 is going to be you're going to start to see the acceleration of these AI installations, and a lot of probably a lot of people are kind of in a similar situation that we are, is that we are just frantically building for the next 6 months to try to kind of get ready for this onslaught, right? Because the kind of hunger for it, the attitude towards it, it's very, very apparent in the market. It shows up in even the stock market, right? Obviously, the best top stocks are all AI. I think you just got I think 2026 is going to be largely about that story. And if I'm going to make I think the interesting kind of curveball stuff is, how does it translate to physical and when? Mm-hmm. So like self-driving trucks, self-driving cars, when does that stuff all start to hook up also? But I think that's harder to predict.
Yeah, it's technology. It's if you're anti-technology, it's going to be a bad time for you.
Yeah,
it's going to be a great time for us.
Yeah, I think you also asked specifically what I would do. I'm advocating cultural changes to the way we think about this stuff, right? And I think you have to push in your org for this stuff to be front and center, and kind of start leaning in towards this, because I think otherwise you're going to get caught flat-footed.
Yeah, well said. Now, is there anything that you feel is important to mention that we haven't already talked about?
No, I feel like we've covered everything. We've been pretty thorough, honestly.
I mean, I had a whole list of questions, but it just that the conversation went in a great direction, and I love diving deep into the AI agent, sort of world. So this lined up perfully. So
I'm sure my marketing guy will yell at me. He always gives me these things I'm supposed to do, and then I end up just talking about whatever I'm doing, all this stuff. But anyway,
well, I think we hit on the important stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's AI, it's technology, it's data, and then it's how can folks actually use this to make real impact within their company.
Sweet.
So, all right, Jason, where can folks, follow more of your work, maybe get signed up for a Shipium demo?
Yeah, so shipium.com, obviously you can request a demo there. LinkedIn, Jason Murray, Shipium CEO, should be able to find me. Always, I think LinkedIn is probably our most active social media platform. So anything on that front, we try to keep pretty up to date on what we're posting and doing. But would love to talk to anyone who wants to talk. So great.
Awesome. Well, this was a fascinating conversation. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll have to have you back on in the future whenever these
awesome.
AI agents are taking hold, and how we can kind of take advantage of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you, Jason.
So much. Yeah.